This Choircast podcast is proudly brought to you by RJ the Astronaut by John Turney, published by Choir and available now. Join RJ on his out-of-this-world journey filled with loving conversations, drama, and thought-provoking questions. Available now on Amazon.com. Get your copy and embark on an unforgettable adventure today. Dive into RJ's world where every moment sparks imagination and every page ignites curiosity. Don't miss out. Grab your copy now and soar beyond.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. John Turney, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's finally good to be here because we've had so much technical difficulty getting to this spot.
Yeah.
It has been insane, so I'm glad it's all finally working.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here with you.
All right, well, just tell us a little bit about like who you are and what you're currently up to, and I'd like to know a little bit about how you got here after that.
Who am I? I work for a large warehouse wholesale company everybody knows called Costco. That's my real job. I've been working there now officially for 30 years. On the side of that, well, who else am I? I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a caretaker of a big chunk of land that we own. We own 23 acres up here in Northern California.
Oh, wow.
We have dogs and cats and goats. So we have a nice, what I call our little chunk of heaven. I'm an author, podcaster, musician, theater guy. I mean, former associate pastor, former worship pastor, all the things that build into what becomes what you see in front of you right now. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got like your hand in a lot of different pools of thought there. Like, what do you do with goats? We got a couple goats. They were just pets that we have at because we live in rural Michigan. So
that's about what we do with goats. They keep we have a section of our property that I guess you would consider the yard. On 23 acres, the section around the house is kind of considered the yard. So we just tether them up and they kind of keep the grass down. So it keeps me from having to mow as much, which helps me out. But other than that, they just sit around and make their bleeding noises and let me know if they're tangled and I have to go and untangle them. But other than that, yeah, they just go around and eat food, eat grass.
they're like little weed whips.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Self-propelled, self-fueled.
Yep.
How many you got?
Just two.
Just the two?
Just a couple. Yeah, a couple.
Yeah, we got two. What kind do you have?
I think they're Nubian.
The tall ones with the floppy ears?
Yeah, they have the floppy ears, yeah.
Oh, those are cute. Yeah.
Before that, we had these bigger goats. They were pack goats. And the person that we got them from had read somewhere that if you let them into your house with you, that they'll imprint with you and they'll go everywhere you go. But he had always meant for them to be pack goats for when he goes hunting. But they were so imprinted on him that when he left them behind to go hunting, they would make so much noise that it affected his ability to hunt. So he got rid of them, and that's how we ended up with those. And we kept those until they unfortunately passed away. One had a heart attack and died, and the other was mangled by a neighbor's dog, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, that's happened around us too. Yeah, I found that if you bring a goat in your house, they poop on your floor.
Yeah. I don't think goats can be potty trained, so I don't think I'm going to try that.
I don't think they know when they're going.
I think you're right.
Oh, that's cool. Well, can you share a little bit about your upbringing? Have you always lived in Northern California in the rural zones?
Well, we lived in I was born and raised in a town called Eureka, California, which is the county seat of Humboldt County, which is when, if anyone wants to know where, when we talk about Northern California, a lot of people talk about the Bay Area, like San Francisco. We're 5 hours north of that. So we're more northern than the Bay Area. We're closer to the Oregon border than we are to any major city. So I was born and raised in Eureka, California. My wife and I moved up here to Neeland, which is just a small community of maybe like 200 people. We moved up here about 20 years ago. Um, but yeah, I was born in Eureka, born into a religion of faith um, that we kind of, with my parents, we kind of bounced around from church to church. There wasn't never really like this like push that we had to go to church. There were times where we would go to church and times we wouldn't go to church, but we were considered all the time that we were Christian. Um, and then we kind of made our home in a Foursquare church, and that's kind of where we ended up, and that's where I was until I was about 18. That's when I left the church for lots of reasons. I'm someone who likes to ask questions, and found out pretty quickly that a lot of churches, a lot of pastors, a lot of Sunday school teachers don't like questions. They don't want you to be questioning what they're teaching. They don't want you to question the Bible for sure. And so, and I've told this on other podcasts. I've told this on my podcast. There was a point where, when I was quite young, probably 8 or 9, where my parents were brought into the pastor's office and asked to talk to me about my asking all these questions, and maybe ask me to kind of quit it, basically, for a
Oh,
lack of a
wow.
better description. And to my parents' credit, they never told me. They never told me that this. I didn't find out about this meeting until I was much much older. I didn't know about it. I didn't know that I was causing any waves. Um, but kids are smart, and they can kind of realize when their questions aren't being taken serious or they aren't wanted. So I kind of started to kind of internalize all this stuff, um, and had a hard time just reconciling what I was thinking inside with what was being taught to me at church. And so, move forward to my teenage years, I was becoming, rather rebellious. Got into drugs and alcohol, lived a this dualistic life where I was still going to church. Like, I still felt like I had to get right with God all the time. So I was going to youth group, Saturday night service, Sunday night service. If there was any other program going on in the church, I was there. I mean, I was that much involved with the church. But on the outside of the church, I was hanging out with a whole bunch of different types of people, getting myself into trouble. And at some point, um, just realized that this whole God thing wasn't working for me. That I couldn't figure out how a God that couldn't take me for who I was a God worth worshiping. And so around 18 is when I just kind of walked away from the church.
Mm.
And but I walked away from the church in a kind of a more of a rebellious way. Like, I don't need you, screw you guys. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing, So even though I left the church, I still felt like something was missing. So I went searching for God or the divine through other sources. So I studied a whole bunch of different religions. I was an atheist. Felt like if I couldn't find a God that was worth worshiping, I didn't believe there was a God at all. Um, I studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, all kinds of religions, trying to find something that would fit that gap that I still felt like I had. Um, and So that was my early upbringing within the church. If any of that made sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering what kind of questions an 8-year-old can have in their
Well,
mind that's threatening to, a pastor
it
who's been
was
through
it was
seminary.
yeah, it was stupid stuff too. It was questions like, if Adam and Eve started the whole human race and they had their kids, who do their kids have kids with? It was just really, the same thing with Noah, right? Noah supposedly, if the story of Noah is true, now we have a family who is repopulating the earth again. And I think they were just in questions they were uncomfortable talking about. I mean, I think we all can figure out the answer to what happened within these myths of, but then there's even within that, there's stories where they go off and they find themselves a wife. And it's like, well, they found a wife where? And it's simple questions off of just reading the Bible and asking questions about um, things like that.
Hmm.
They weren't deep theological questions, because I don't, as an 8 or 9 year old, I wasn't thinking like that, but I was already finding inconsistencies, I thought.
Yeah, that being able to see the inconsistencies there. I what do you think is like how is the Bible being read in such a way that it you have to have like this rock solid literalistic viewpoints of scripture that then questions become a threat to like what's the mechanism behind the reading that where this all goes wrong in the first place?
Well, I think that's it exactly. I think that we take it all as literal truth. The story of Adam and Eve is a literal story. The story of the flood is a literal story, um, and I think that's where we go wrong. And as I become a little bit more versed in these writings, I feel like these are more, it's a mythicized history, I guess you might say. Um, I mean, I truly believe that the story of Adam and Eve is just that, a story. I believe that the Noah, or um, story of, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Oh my goodness, the whale or the fish
Jonah.
and
Oh yeah,
Jonah.
Jonah.
Thank you. People are like, yeah, you know the Bible. You don't even know the name Jonah. But I think these are all stories to tell some kind of truth. And once I was able to disassociate myself with these have to be true and this is exactly how things happen, I found that they made more sense. They gave me more to work with than if I had to like hold to these truths that the whole human race was started by this person named Adam and this woman named Eve, and that the Earth is somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. I mean, it's just asinine to hold on to those kinds of truths. Once, I mean, if you have to ignore everything in science, you just have to ignore everything that comes to you from the science, and unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do. They just say, well, science has it wrong. It's obviously the Earth is 6,000 years old. The Bible tells us it's. I believe the Bible. The Bible is true. So that's exactly what we say.
Yeah. I've found like interacting with certain evangelicalistic fundamentalist perspectives that like as soon as it might be bigger than literal, then they don't have control over
Right.
what you think, how you act, what makes you in, what throws you out. And I've learned in the last couple of years, like fundamentalism is not about faith, it's about control.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
trying to control the questions, trying to like even if you look at how like a church operates on a Sunday morning in a lot of spaces, they're about controlling someone's emotion.
Yeah.
In the same way like a theater would, which is kind of a neutral thing, but uh, I go back and forth because humans are psychological beings, but at the same time, there are things that it becomes about control so much of the time that
Yeah.
like you have to read it literally because if you go on the outside of the church for science, then you might find a different authority than us, and that'll be
Yeah.
scary. So we'll have to feed you the science, and you
Yeah.
get a lot
And
of
that
like weird stuff out of that, like flat earthers and young earthers,
Well,
and
yeah, then that becomes that gets really scary because you get was it Ken Ham with his arc experience or whatever it's called,
yeah, I
and,
think he's
and but
making the
he's
Tower of Babel too.
oh great because apparently they didn't learn their lesson the first time,
Yeah,
but I mean but then that is proclaimed as true science.
yeah,
And that's what gets scary is like they're there's scientific method to, there's the way things work within science, and the way things work when in a situation where with like the ark experiences, that's just taking the Bible literally, with regardless if there's inconsistencies or not, and not looking at it from an outside in and saying, okay, well, let's take this serious, and let's look at this and let's see why there's an inconsistency here, which is what science would do. And so that it gets really scary to me. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I know some people find comfort in that, in things being consistently the same all the time, but at some point you have to ask questions, and those questions become problematic when they won't answer them. That's when things,
Mm-hmm.
I feel, become problematic.
Yeah. So what was it at 18 that you finally said, I'm done and I'm leaving? Like,
For me, the big one for me was, by then I was in theater, and I don't want to paint the brush that if you're in theater that you end up automatically working with a bunch of gay people, but um, for me, that's kind of how it happened. So I was asked to work in theater. I was about 17, and I was asked to do a show at a local theater, a musical, and I had been raised being told that homosexuality was wrong, that they were deviant, that there was something seriously wrong with them. And then I ended up doing this show, and with a bunch of very openly gay people, and through that experience, and then working with them again and again over a couple shows over a year or so, starting to realize that everything I'd been told about homosexuals was wrong, and that they were just like me. They were regular people who just wanted to be accepted for who they were, wanted to find love like I wanted to find love. They wanted to be treated as normal human beings, which God forbid we do. And so that was the first like really big question for me as to what is the church getting wrong? I mean, really wrong. And so a lot of these people are still my friends today. I mean, I've been doing theater since I was 17. I'm 54 years old now, and I've had long-term friendships from working in theater. So that was the big step away for me, because I could not reconcile that these people were going to hell. I just couldn't, just because of who they loved, and I had a really big problem with that. And so that was the linchpin, or the straw that broke the camel's back, that finally just said, you know what, I'm done with this. I can't be part of this anymore.
yeah. What, were there other dominoes that started to fall after that? Or was that just like, that was the final one? So what was some leading up to that, in your teen years?
In my teen years, I think it was just mostly being rebellious. Honestly, if I have to look back now and say, I was deconstructing before the word deconstruction came, but honestly, it was, people who drink aren't that bad. People who use drugs aren't as bad as, I mean, they are all, they're all still humans. They just do things that you don't approve of. Anything can be done in a bad way, or anything can be done in a consistent and, in a way that's not harmful to the body. I believe. Um, but as a teenager, I think it was more being rebellious, saying, "Hey, I want to live my life. Leave me alone." Um, I do. We can get to it here in a little bit. I do have what I would call a second deconstruction, which I think was a little bit um, more detailed, and more like going down all these like hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
But at 18, it was more of like, I don't want to do this anymore. God is a monster. He's horrible to anybody who doesn't believe in him. Because honestly, if as I'm starting to look at the homosexuality and those people as, I don't believe they're going to hell, then it started questioning things about other faiths. If I don't believe they're going to hell, what about someone who happens to be Muslim, or happens to be Hindu, or happens to be Buddhist? Are they also going to hell just because they were born into a place where they would follow a different religion? And so these questions also came up as to, I don't think that's true. I don't think by an accident of birth you're destined to hell. I just don't.
Mm, yeah. You eventually become like an associate pastor at a church. So
Yeah.
let's connect some dots from that moment there to kind of entering back in and saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. How did that journey go?
Well, I met my now wife, excuse me, when I was late teen, so like 19, almost turning 20. We got married when I was 21. My wife is an atheist, still is. Um, and so that was problematic for some people in my family, that I married an atheist. But at the time, I wasn't involved in church at all, so I didn't find it problematic at all. Um, Her being an atheist and me being agnostic at best at the time, worked for me. And we built a relationship, we built a family. Um, Over the years, we've had 3 kids. During this time, it wasn't this is, I guess, my time of wandering in the desert, I guess you might say, where I was not connected to any faith, uh, but still searching for something. Um, Buddhism was probably the closest that I found to something that I could relate to, and still is today. It's one of those faiths that I still connect with in a very strong way. Um, and so, fast forward again quite a few years, we have 3 kids. My daughter is just about to start high school, and we're stressing about how we're going to get her to school every day because there's no bus that comes up to where we live. So someone's going to have to drive her to school every day, and we're not sure how we're going to make this work. And I, through a really funky moment, end up breaking my leg, pretty bad. Um, and I can't walk for 3 months, and then right before my daughter's going back to school, I can at least drive a car. So I end up taking her to school every day. And then my doctor wants me to walk every day. So every day after I drop her off, I'd go for a walk. And I would go walk in the Target shopping center. And then I would go walk the mall, our local mall. And then I would meet my parents for breakfast every day. And my parents are still very, very much in the church, very much connected with the faith. Um, I honestly, I can't remember what church they were going to at the time, but they were definitely still within a Christian church. And I would meet my parents for breakfast every day, and my dad would try to give me a book to read. He's like, "Hey, why don't you read this book by Spurgeon, or why don't you read this book by Chesterton?" And I'm like, "No, Dad, I don't want to read a book by an old white guy. It doesn't appeal to me." And so he wasn't being pushy about it, but he was asking pretty regularly. He's like, "Hey, you should read this book. It's a really good book." And finally, I broke down. I was like, "You know what? I'll read this book by C.S. Lewis because at least I know who he is." I'd read all the Narnia books. So I ended up reading a book called Mere Christianity, which is a quick read. I think I read it in a few days, if not a couple days. Um, and what was remarkable to me at the time, was how quickly he answered questions that I had. Like, I'd read a paragraph and I'm like, "Yeah, but what about this?" in my mind. And then I'd turn the page and he would answer that question. Now, knowing now what I know about apologetics, I mean, that's literally what they're doing. They're trying to defend their faith, right? Um, and But it was an eye-opening experience for me enough that I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to give this another shot. I'm going to give it another try. So I tried. I called my brother. My brother was going through, at the time, unbeknownst to me, going through a pretty major deconstruction. So he's like, "Hey, I'm telling you right now, don't jump right back into church. Take your time. Read some books. Read." And he gave me some authors to read, and he was really into the hyper grace movement at the time. And so I jumped into the deep end of the hyper grace movement, from going from not being involved with church at all into this hyper grace, which for me was the beginning of like, okay, this is remarkable, and it was remarkable until it wasn't, and we can get into that, also.
What is
But
the hyper grace movement? I'm not sure. I'm familiar with that term.
it was just where, it was basically all legalism in church is wrong. There isn't that you are saved by grace and grace alone. and that God loves everybody. God loves you. God loves you who you are. I bit into that like quickly. That this idea that God loves me no matter what I do. Um, and but the problem was there was still some rules that were connected with the grace movement that I mean you still end up following a church. You still end up in a organized religion, and they start setting up rules, and because they want to keep, there's always about control, right? So I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Oh, so um, I was looking for a church. I found a Calvary Chapel church that I really enjoyed, so I started going to that church and ended up on their worship team, and was playing bass for them. And then a friend of mine who was a pastor asked me at one point to come and lead worship for him just for a Sunday because he didn't have a worship leader, and I did that. And then he's like, "Why don't you just come work for me?" And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't, and I was still buying into this idea like I had to be led or God had to answer these questions for me. I was like, well, I don't know if I'm being led to your church. Let me pray about it. Um, and so I went back to the pastor of the church that I was at and talked to him and said, hey, I'm being asked to take over the worship team of this other church. I'm not sure if that's right for me. And we prayed about it. And he's like, well, it's a decision you're going to have to make. So you need to pray about it and see what God wants you to do. And I don't know if I ever got an answer really from God or not. Um, I would, if I had to guess, I would say no. That I just decided that this was a decision I was going to do. But one of the agreements I made is that I wanted to preach. So I was like, I'll come along with you as long as I can preach, say like once a month. And he was all for that. So I moved from Calvary Chapel to Southern Baptist, and started leading worship at a Southern Baptist church. It wasn't, I mean, nothing about the church made you think it was Southern Baptist, other than it was. And you can't see behind me, but right there, that's my license to preach
Oh,
in a
you still
Southern
got it.
Baptist. Yep, still got it. Um, so I started preaching there about once a month, and my brother was starting to preach at his church about, I'd say about once a month also, with this, both of us with this idea that that's what we wanted to do. So we'd watch each other's sermons, and I would give him a little bit of grief sometimes. It's like, I saw what you did there. You came right, because he and I were both at this point now. We were both testing the waters of universalism, universal salvation, that maybe there is no hell. These are questions that we had been working through, my brother and I, kind of together and kind of separately. But I'm in a Southern Baptist church. He's in a non-denominational church, but still pretty strong. And it's a Bible-led church. So there were things he could say and things he couldn't say. There were things I could say and things I couldn't say. So we'd give each other a little grief every once in a while. So it was like, I saw what you did there. You came right up to that line, and then you took a step back. It's like, yeah, that's as far as I could go. And so that's when I started questioning. Like I said, I started questioning: does hell exist? Do you need to be saved? Um, is God in control? Is God omnipotent? All these things. Does God really have all? Can God? Does God know everything at all times? Everything that's going to happen? And these are questions that I started to question, asking myself. And so as I'm preaching, I can't preach these things. I did preach a pretty grace-filled message that God loves you no matter what. God loves you just where you are. Um, but as a worship leader, I was playing the game of, I don't know if I don't know if you've been involved in a worship team at all or
Hmm.
done any of that, but there's certain songs you sing in a certain order to get a certain emotion.
Yes.
And then you have a point where you have a nice little speech already prepared to like pull the tears out and get people all, emotionally involved in your music. And I started feeling like that was not very, what's the word? Not very real. So I was already doubting that part of what I was doing. And then So I had a conversation. I was supposed to preach the next Sunday, and I had the worst writer's block I've ever had in my life, and I couldn't figure out why. I was super stressed. I couldn't come up with anything to preach on, and in my head, it was like, it's because I'm lying to the pastor and I'm lying to the congregation and I'm lying to myself that I don't believe what they believe, but I'm still standing up in front of them as if I do. So I had a meeting with the pastor and I just laid this all out. And I was like, I don't believe that hell exists. I don't believe that you need to be saved. I believe in universal reconciliation. I believe universal salvation. Um, I don't believe that homosexuals are going to hell. And I just laid it all out. I was like, and because of all this, I don't think I can be your pastor anymore or your associate pastor. I mean, it's not fair to you. It's not fair to your congregation. Um, he was kind of grooming me to take over. He was looking at retiring. I was like, it's not fair. As soon as you leave, I'm going to change everything, and the whole congregation is going to leave. I'm going to basically destroy your church in like probably a month. So I graciously bowed out of that, and then that's kind of where I left the church for the second time.
What was your pastor's response to that meeting?
Honestly, it was very, very good. We're still friends to this day. Um, I still consider him one of my good friends. We and I don't want people to think that because I did stand up in front of the congregation and I told them I didn't tell them all of that. I gave them some other reasons for me leaving. And if anyone happens to listen to this who remembers me from then, I don't want them to think I was lying because I truly was telling the truth. Because one of the things I told them was like, I feel like I am being led to open my own church. And I want to open a church within the homeless community of, of Eureka. But it was going to be a church that it wasn't going to be anything like anything I'd ever done before. It was going to be a church where I wasn't going to be preaching about salvation. I wasn't going to be preaching about hell because I didn't think these things, I didn't think salvation was needed. I didn't think hell existed, but it didn't work out. It was something that for whatever reason wasn't in the cards for me, and it didn't pan out for me. But he honestly, like I said, we're still friends. Haven't seen him in a little bit now. He's been busy, but we see each other at least once a week in passing, at least, and we can catch up and talk. Um, but no, he's a really good guy. I really admire him. I think he's an amazing pastor. He's on a path that I'm not on anymore.
Mm. And what was your wife's response to you going into church and taking on a pastor role and then leaving church? How did she respond to that whole movement?
Um, when I do something, I'm 100% in, or 1,000% in. So there was a point where it was a little frustrating in our house because when I stepped back into church, because then everything became about church. Everything became about, what I need to learn about God, what I need to learn about the Bible. And I was just devouring book after book after book saying, see, I was told this is wrong. I was starting to read the Desert Fathers, um, realizing that universal salvation was one of the leading beliefs of the time prior to what we were all taught when we were in church. Um, so it was probably a little tiring and a little exhausting at my house around this guy who was like delving into all this stuff, posting online daily, if not multiple times a day, about what I was reading. And she's like, it's just like, that's all you do now. You just sit around and you read your books and you post your posts on Facebook about God. And she's like, it's a little tiring. And so I think I had to work through the course of that to the point where it was also tiring for me. And because what happens is all you do is you end up arguing with people. People don't like what you're posting, especially if you're talking about universal salvation or that women can preach. That was another big one that I got into multiple arguments online about women preaching, about homosexuality not being a sin, that there is no hell. Um, And at some point, you just get really, really tired of just being in arguments all the time. Um, so I kind of backed off of that a little bit. Well, actually, quite a bit, actually. And so uh, there was a rough patch where she's just like, this is kind of asinine, all the stuff you're doing. And I, looking back at it now, I'm like, yeah, you were right. It was a little kooky for a little while. I got a little off the rails.
Are you going through a faith transition? I can relate. And I've written a book to help us through this process. My name is Jackie Turner, and the book is called Tumbled People: Deconstructing and Reconstructing Your Faith. It walks us through the stages of faith development as well as offering practical spiritual practices you can try at home, or you can do it in a group. It comes with journaling pages too, so you can write in it. And it's only $10 on Amazon. I hope you check it out and we can walk this journey together, because there is hope after deconstruction.
Yeah. So, like, where are you at now with things, with faith and God and all that?
Where am I now?
Yeah. How would you describe where you're at now?
I'm not a Christian. I don't use that word. Um, I'm a follower of Jesus, and this is one of the questions that I had to ask myself. This was a question I asked myself actually a couple years ago now, I think. Um, if I was to take Jesus as a person and take away all the miracles, take away the resurrection, take away the virgin birth, take away all of that, and just be left with his teachings, would I still follow this man? And my answer is yes, I would, because I believe what he has to say is it's vital, it's important. Basically, it comes down to love God and love your neighbor, or love your neighbor as yourself, and then the idea of loving your enemy comes off of that, and that's enough for me. And then that, with some other faiths that I've connected to, which would be some of the Native American faiths and then the Buddhist faith. Um, that's where I am right now. I don't consider myself um, a follower of Christianity, but I do consider myself still someone who follows the teachings of Jesus.
Hmm. I talked with Randy Woodley, I think it was last year, and he considers himself a member of the Cherokee tribe that follows Jesus, but he also refuses to use the word Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the same reasons as just.
I think it's problematic. I think the word Christian, especially in this day and age, especially with what Christianity has become, um, when you see it in the news, when you see it on TV, when you see it in social media, this evangelical fundamentalist version of Christianity, the Christian nationalists, unfortunately, they have the loudest platform right now when it comes to Christianity. And I cannot even in any way connect myself to that.
Yeah, same here. They're really loud.
Yeah.
They seem to be really big as well.
Yeah.
We've got people that are rising up within the faith. There's Christians against Christian nationalism. There's David Gushee. There's movements in it that are trying to counter it, but it seems like a tidal wave.
Yeah, sadly.
But I'm kind of seeing like David Gushee calls it not Christian nationalism, but like reactionary. I can't remember his full term, but it's a reactionary Christianity where we've been reacting against culture. We can trace it back to the 20s. When we had the Scopes monkey trial and the prohibition, and we've always been reacting against, but like the tide has been turning against Christianity in culture for a long time.
Right.
And it feels like this is like their last ditch effort to try and regain control over, because fundamentalism is about control, but try and regain control over the society that they once held. And
well, the scary part is, having that connection to politics, and having such a strong connection with politics seems to be, in a lot of ways, turning a tide that's really scary.
mm-hmm.
And I see, I see a lot of the nuns and duns finally speaking out and saying, "Hey, we don't, we don't believe this. We don't follow this." But unfortunately, right now with the political division we have, and they seem to, I don't know if they really are, but they do seem to have an upper hand when it comes to how loud they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part that's scaring me.
Yeah, they've been gatekeepers for a very long time, and
Yeah.
I think they're fighting off a humbling that is, I think, would be very helpful for them to walk through.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they would do it, but I mean, we're at the end of a political battle, right? That's coming to an end here in less than a month now, and it will be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I'm not predicting. I can't predict. I don't think anyone can predict because
Mm-hmm.
um, it's going to be too close. I'm my biggest fear is we're going to go through another January 6th. We're going to have another that's going to be so close that the voices are going to be loud enough that another election was stolen, um, and then we're going to have to go through another battle like that. And I'm afraid, honestly. I hate, I don't want to sound like I'm a wimp. I don't want to sound like I'm not going to stand up, but I'm 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 nervous
Yeah, me
about
too.
how this political season, sorry, is gonna play itself out.
Yeah, that anxiousness it just seems like across the board. I have
Yeah,
friends who are just as anxious that Trump might lose as I am that he might win. And, it seems like there's apocalyptic language on both sides of the aisle,
yeah,
but for some reason it feels, we've been using apocalyptic language since Ronald Reagan, but this one
true.
does feel like a little more existential.
Yeah, yeah,
Because we're actually getting at the mechanisms of governance,
yeah.
that like they're trying to change the rules of the game, not just who's in and who's out, but
Well, and
that's why it feels different to me.
they are willing to put people in harm's way, um, to get their point across, or to get their what they consider the right America,
Mm-hmm.
and that's scary to me. That
Yeah.
I mean, what they're willing to do, and what we watch, what we're and the rhetoric that they're willing to spew. Um, it's honestly, I don't know how people follow the guy. I really don't. But that's another story for another time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have the time to get into
We don't.
why.
We don't. And I have been trying to ask those questions and like really like try to dive into the minds of the people who find comfort in him. And
Yeah,
I really do want to understand like this last 6 months I had like ever since I guess that last year of him in office, I had like this PTSD of hearing his voice or seeing him in the news. I had
yeah,
to stop watching my, like the news feed on, Apple News.
right.
Just refused to open it for years. And then finally here we are in this cycle. And I'm like, all right, I got to get over this. And I need to like actually dive into the mindsets behind it. And I'm trying to understand it and learn. I think I've learned a lot of things about how we differ and why.
Yeah,
And it really comes down to, I think, their discomfort with a pluralistic society, their
yeah,
discomfort for other people having a voice. I think they're very uncomfortable with democracy itself because democracy doesn't lean in their favor any longer
right.
because they're not in the majority. So there's just a lot of it's like a death scenario that's scary, and when you're dying, man, you just grasp for anything.
Well, and in a weird way, I think they've grasped onto another. So you have this political party, this national conservative, ultra conservative party, grasping onto a Christian evangelical fundamentalism that is also dying. These are both, so they're both in their, I believe they're both in their death throes.
Yeah.
And so I could see what you're saying, where they're grasping at anything to save some remnant of what they are or what they want to be. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and those things are like Christendom. Christendom is dying. It's pretty much dead in Europe, and it's on its way here. And we're uncomfortable with that as you know, Christianity, because God needs to win. You know, like so it can't happen here. Because there must have been something wrong with Europe for it to happen there, so it can't happen here because we got it down. So I have really dove into trying to just understand the fear that has been fanned by this man, because it's when you get down, like someone once told me that if you look underneath anger, you're gonna find sadness, you're gonna find fear, you're gonna find unprocessed grief, and that's really hard to like peel that away. So we'd rather just hang on to the anger part. But that's what I think, that Donald Trump has taken something that's been festering for a while and just added the gasoline to it, and just fanned it up really well in a way that is in his favor. And I'm pretty uncomfortable with it myself.
Well, I mean, and a lot of this stuff was coming into play as I was leaving the church too. So there was that as well. I was never going to be someone who's going to preach about the American way. I was never going to preach. I mean, one of the things that one of the first things I would do if I was running a church is I would take the American flag out of the church. I don't believe it belongs there. I don't believe, I don't want anyone to feel like you have to be American first to be to be a Christian. And I think a lot of churches believe that. And so there was also that for me. The political party that was starting to take over as I was leaving the church was the party of Trump, and I could see the writing on the wall of how the church was going to become a pro-Trump church, and I couldn't do that. There's no way in hell that I was doing that. So that was another reason for me to have to kind of step away.
Yeah,
and it was an interesting time. Those first few months of leaving the church and not having anything to do on Sundays. My brother and I talk about this too, about, Sundays for, 5 years at one church and then 2 years at this other church, was getting up to be at the church before anybody else, either to set up for worship or to set up to preach. And all of a sudden I had my Sundays I could sleep in. But there was that question of, well, what now? What do I do now? Right? And so I was still kind of in the throes of argumenting with people on social media. And I came to realize that I was doing exactly what they were doing, just from another side. I was using the Bible against them like they were using the Bible against me. I was like, if you're going to cherry pick the Bible, I'm going to cherry pick the Bible. I can find verses to defend everything that I want to defend. And so I had never done anything with Lent, but Lent was coming up, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to give up the Bible for Lent. I'm just going to give it up. I'm going to put it down. I'm not going to pick it up. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to, if I feel the need to defend myself, I'm going to defend myself from my own actions and my own words. I'm not going to use the Bible to defend me. And so I did that for the extent of Lent. And then at the end of that, realized I'm not sure I need this book at all, ever again. So I set it down, and I was like, well, what do I do with that? What do I do with this? Because I'm still like looking for things to do. I'm still going through my deconstruction. I'm still reading about deconstruction. I'm still reading, different books by different authors. The list becomes so long I can't even think of names anymore. But I decided that I was going to write a blog. But I wanted to write a blog as if somebody was somehow disconnected from Holy Scripture and ended up having a conversation with God. And I was like, well, where on this planet can you make that happen? Because you can find a Bible anywhere. So it's unrealistic to think that someone is anywhere where they can't. I mean, they would have to make a conscious choice to not open it. And I was trying to make it a way that they just didn't even have access to it. So I ended up putting my character in space on a broken down spaceship heading to God knows where. And as he's on this ship, ends up having this conversation with God. And so it was a weekly blog where I got to ask all the questions I've ever wanted to ask God. And that's what it was. It was just question after question after question, asking God about things that I wanted answers. And I didn't use the Bible. I didn't use any scripture. I didn't use anything. I just used a conversation between me, well, a character named RJ, and God, and answered all these questions. And then that, I thought this was going to go on forever. I thought this would be what I would do, just keep doing this forever. And as it came close to a year, I realized that it was kind of done. I'd done what I needed to do, and so I ended the blog, and that ended up becoming the book I wrote, called RJ the Astronaut, which well, I don't have it. I had somewhere behind me. I have, oh, there it is, RJ the Astronaut, right there.
There he is.
So I got connected with Choir Publishing, and after, I wrote it as a blog, so obviously it needed some editing and put it into more of a book form, and so that became the book that I published with Choir, called RJ the Astronaut.
Nice. What was one of your favorite scenes out of that book?
Oh, there's so many, because I wrote it, there's a lot of chapters because it's written as a weekly blog. So I think it ends up having 51 chapters. And I always joke that it could almost be used as like not a journal. That's not the right word, but like
a devotional.
Almost like a devotional. Yeah, I don't want to use that word, but you could almost do it. And then the 52nd week is where you contemplate and you write down your thoughts on God. Because there's 51 chapters, 51 weeks, and then the 52nd week you could write down what you gleaned from all of this as your idea of who God is. I would say some of the ones that I really enjoyed were ones where I talked about. Well, and the funny thing is, if I go back now and read it, there's some things in there that I don't believe anymore. And one of them is. And it's going to sound weird, but I don't believe in universal salvation, because I don't believe that you need to be saved. So universal salvation to me sounds like there's still something you have to do. So I don't use the phrase universal salvation. I believe everybody's in, period. But I don't believe there is some. You don't have to pray a prayer. You don't have to ask God into your heart. You don't have to do any of that. I think there is an acknowledgement that you can make that makes you in a better alignment with God or the divine or whatever you want to call it, that then starts you on a path towards loving your enemy and loving your neighbor and all of that. But at the end of the day, I believe we're all in, period. So I like some of the chapters I wrote on that, even though I some of the language I wouldn't use the same way anymore, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, then you started a podcast called This Is Not Church with your brother about 4 years ago. So what was how did that come about? What ideas were like brewing in your head or your brother's head? And you're like, we got to do this.
If you ask my brother, he'll say that I pulled him into this kicking and screaming, that it was my idea. He didn't really want to do it, that I forced his hand. But I wouldn't say that. I mean, I was definitely the driving force. At the end of the blog, so to put things into perspective in the correct order, it was the blog. At the end of the blog, I started writing it as a book. But during that time of writing it as a book, I was also starting the podcast. So the podcast actually came to be before the book. And so as the blog was ending, I'm like, well, what do I do now? I still have a lot to say, I think. And my brother and I had still been bouncing stuff. And my brother was still a pastor, too. That's something that's kind of important in this connection between how the podcast started. So I reached out to my brother. I said, wouldn't it be interesting to talk about deconstruction from two different perspectives? One of someone who's completely out of the church and one that's still in the church, but trying to change things. Because by this point, he had opened his own church. He had started his own church.
Okay.
And so we're both delving into this idea of deconstruction, but from different sides of the coin, basically. And so that was the start of the podcast, was to talk to people who were deconstructing, to talk to people who were in that world. And the shocking part was, as we started this, my brother and I had both kind of created some friendships with a lot of people online that we considered, important within this world of deconstruction. And so we just reached out to them and said, hey, would you be willing to come onto a new podcast? Thinking if I could get like 10% to say yes, we'd be golden. We got all yeses. Everybody said yes. And so we went from how are we going to do this to, or no, really, how are we going to do this? Because we have a lineup of people that we're going to be talking to. So, I mean, we got to talk to some of the earlier ones that were great were Brad Jersak, Baxter Kruger, Paul Young, Brian McLaren is another one that stands out as someone that we got to talk to that was really cool. But as we were moving through this podcast, my brother ends up closing his church. So so now we're two middle-aged white guys, talking about, by this time we had also ventured out away from just deconstruction. We were talking about politics. We were talking about Black Lives Matter. We were talking about LGBTQIA plus rights. We'd reached out to, quite a larger audience than just the deconstruction audience. And as we realized that it was, we're just two white guys talking about all this, we were like, well, we should bring on another host. One, someone who's still in church, because we'd lost that voice. And two, someone who doesn't look like us. So we brought on Bethany as a third host. So Bethany is someone that we brought on to give us another voice, a female voice, and the voice of the church still. So that's happened within the last year. But it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work. But we've been having a lot of fun talking to all the different people that we get to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for my podcast, like I talk to folks that I want to learn something from, and I've had to. I joke, like I got done, with my doctorate degree 10 years ago, and it's like I'm bored. I need to keep learning something. So it's like this is my ongoing education, and people can just kind of listen in to what I'm learning. And
it's like later today we're going to be talking to a Palestinian Christian, talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's going to be an amazing conversation. I can't wait for it. I mean,
awesome.
I mean, where else are you going to get to talk to these kinds of people on a regular basis than doing something like a podcast?
Yeah. Well, where do you want to send people to, one, buy your book, and two, connect with your podcast and community that you're growing?
Well, the easiest way, and unfortunately I don't want to give Bezos my money, but the easiest way to find my book is to go to Amazon.com and just type in RJ the Astronaut. It is kind of difficult to look under my name because there's another author with the same exact name, and he writes science-based books. Someday I hope to meet this guy. Maybe we can trade books. But yeah, there's another John Turney out there. But if you look up RJ the Astronaut with my last name, it's available in paperback. It's available as an ebook, and it's also available as an Audible. So if you're someone who doesn't like to read paperbacks, there's a Kindle version and the audio version. So there's something for everybody.
Nice. Who recorded your audio?
Honestly, I don't remember his name. Choir set it up for me, and then they sent me a bunch of different people to audition, and then I picked the one I liked the best, and I honestly don't remember his name.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I will put those links down in the comments so people can just click on it and have to do a lot of searching.
Yeah.
And then how do you connect to your podcast? You got a website, or do you just want to search on your podcast?
There's a
platform?
website. We have a website. It's thisisnotchurch.com. You can connect to the podcast through there. I'm doing my best to keep that updated. The podcast itself is updated there, but you can also find us on every platform. So if you're already using a platform like Apple Podcast or Spotify or Google Play or whatever one you use, if you just type in "This Is Not Church," you'll find us. We're on all the platforms.
Well, I'll make sure to hit that in the comments too. Well, John, thanks for coming on and sharing your story and your life and some perspectives. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a great time.
Awesome.